The silence that descended upon the dining room was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and colder than the December wind howling off Lake Michigan and battering the glass walls of the penthouse. 20 guests sat frozen, their silver forks hovering halfway to their mouths, the crystal glasses of vintage Cabernet abandoned on the white marble table. The only sound remaining was the faint hum of the heating system, a system that cost more to maintain annually than most families earned in a decade. Julian Vance, my 27-year-old son, sat at the head of the table. He looked every inch the master of the universe he believed himself to be. His tailored Italian suit fit his frame perfectly. His hair was styled with precision, and the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist caught the light of the chandelier. Beside him, his wife, Isabella, smirked. She was a woman whose beauty was as sharp and manufactured as the diamonds adorning her neck. Julian cleared his throat, evidently pleased with the shock he had just administered. He picked up his wineglass, swirled the dark red liquid, and looked down the long table at me. I sat near the kitchen entrance, my hands resting in my lap, hiding the tremors that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with a breaking heart. "Mother," Julian repeated, his voice smooth and devoid of warmth. I think I was quite clear. Isabella and I have been discussing the finances. This penthouse, the location, the lifestyle. It is premium real estate. If you wish to continue occupying the guest suite and joining us for these dinners, it is only fair that you contribute rent. We are running a business here, not a charity ward. Isabella let out a soft, cruel laugh, placing a manicured hand on Julian's arm. Exactly, Elena. We are all adults. You have your pension, don't you? It is time to stop freeloading off Julian's success. He works too hard to support dead weight, even if that weight is family. I looked around the table. These were people I had known for years. Julian's business partners, Isabella's socialite friends, even my own nephew, Marcus, who was currently staring intently at his roasted duck, refusing to meet my eyes. No one spoke, no one defended me. They were all complicit in the narrative Julian had constructed, the narrative of the brilliant, self-made venture capitalist son supporting his frail, simple-minded mother. I slowly pushed my chair back. The scraping sound against the marble floor echoed like a gunshot. I stood up. At 68, my joints sometimes ached in the damp Chicago winter, but tonight I stood as straight as the steel beams that built this city. "I understand, Julian," I said softly. My voice did not shake. The trembling in my hands had ceased, replaced by a cold, steely resolve that I hadn't felt since the boardrooms of the late 90s. "You are right. One should never take luxury for granted." Julian nodded, mistaking my resignation for submission. "Good. I will have my assistant draw up a lease agreement tomorrow. Market rate, minus a small family discount, of course." "Thank you for the dinner," I said. I turned and walked toward the hallway leading to the guest suite. "Elena, wait!" Isabella called out, her tone mocking. "You haven't had dessert. The chef prepared your favorite tiramisu." I did not look back. I walked to the room they allowed me to occupy, the room that was smaller than the walk-in closet in the master bedroom. I closed the door and locked it. For a moment, I leaned against the wood, closing my eyes, letting the pain wash over me. It was a physical blow, a sharp ache in the center of my chest. My son, my only child, the boy I had protected from the harshness of the world, had grown into a man who would charge his own mother for the air she breathed. But the pain was quickly replaced by something else. A familiar fire. It was the same fire that had burned in my gut 40 years ago when I was the only woman on the loading docks of South Chicago. What Julian did not know, what Isabella could not comprehend, and what the sycophants at that table ignored, was the truth behind the illusion. The penthouse on the Gold Coast with the panoramic view of the skyline? It belonged to Vance Global Logistics. The black Aston Martin DB11 that Julian parked in the heated garage? Leased by Vance Global Logistics. The platinum American Express card that Isabella used to fill her closet with Chanel and Gucci? A corporate expense account issued to the subsidiary of Vance Global Logistics. And Vance Global Logistics? I am Elena Vance. I am the majority shareholder, the chairwoman of the board, and the founder of the company. I own the building, I own the car, I own the debt. I own the very suit on my son's back. For 5 years, I had stepped back into the shadows. After my husband, Roberto, passed away, I wanted to see if Julian could swim on his own. I gave him a title, a subsidiary to manage, and the trappings of success, hoping he would grow into the role. I managed the empire from a modest office in the industrial district, letting him play the part of the tycoon in the spotlight. I wanted him to feel confident. I wanted him to feel powerful. I had created a monster. I walked to the small desk in the corner of the room and opened my laptop. The blue light of the screen illuminated my face. I logged into the secure corporate server. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing commands with the precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. It was time to wake up from the dream. The next morning, the city of Chicago woke up to a blizzard. Snow swirled around the skyscrapers, burying the streets in white. Inside the penthouse, the heating system hummed, keeping the brutal reality of winter at bay. I was already gone. I had packed my single suitcase at 4 a.m. and called a standard Uber. I didn't go to another hotel. I went to my real home, a sturdy, modest brownstone in Lincoln Park that I had bought 30 years ago and never sold. It smelled of old books and lemon polish. It smelled of memories. At 9 a.m. sharp, I sat in the conference room of Vance Global Logistics. The industrial complex was miles away from the glitz of the Gold Coast. Here, you could smell diesel fuel and hear the grinding of gears. My personal attorney, David Klein, sat across from me. He was a man of few words and ruthless efficiency. "Are you sure, Elena?" David asked. Looking over the documents I had drafted during the sleepless night, "This is the nuclear option." "It is not nuclear, David," I replied, sipping black coffee from a styrofoam cup. "It is educational. Julian believes he is a king. It is time he learned that a king without a kingdom is just a man in a costume. Execute the orders." At 10:15 a.m., Julian was enjoying a leisurely breakfast of smoked salmon and poached eggs. He was scrolling through his phone, likely checking stock prices or social media engagement. He frowned when his email refreshed. Notification of lease termination. Sender, Vance Asset Management. He tapped the screen, confused. He read the email 3 times. "Dear Mr. Vance, effective immediately, your tenancy at 1500 Lakeshore Drive, Penthouse B, is terminated. Per the terms of the Corporate Housing Agreement, Clause 4B, the owner reserves the right to reclaim the property with 0 notice due to violation of conduct policies. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." "Violation of conduct?" Julian laughed aloud. "This has to be a joke." He dialed the number at the bottom of the email. A voice answered. "Vance Asset Management. How may I direct your call?" "This is Julian Vance. I just received a ridiculous email about my apartment. There is obviously a mistake. I need to speak to the director." "One moment, Mr. Vance." The line clicked. A familiar voice came on the line. It wasn't the director. It was David Klein. "Hello, Julian." "David? What are you doing at Asset Management?" "Look, fix this. Some glitch in the system sent me an eviction notice." "It is not a glitch, Julian," David said calmly. "The instruction came from the chairwoman." "The chairwoman? You mean the board?" "Why would the board care about my apartment?" "Not the board, Julian. The chairwoman. The owner. Your mother." Julian went silent. The phone pressed against his ear. "My mother? What are you talking about? Mom is in the guest room. Your mother left the building at 4 a.m., and she is not just your mother, Julian. She is Elena Vance, the owner of Vance Global Logistics, the entity that owns your apartment, your car, and the credit card Isabella is currently using at Neiman Marcus." Julian felt the room spin. "No, that's impossible. Dad left the company to me. Your father left you a trust fund that you emptied in 2 years on failed crypto investments," David corrected. "Since then, your mother has been funding your lifestyle through the corporate accounts, hoping you would eventually turn a profit in the subsidiary. You haven't. And after your performance at dinner last night, she has decided to cut the cord." "Cut the cord?" "The lease is terminated. The car has been reported as a recalled company asset. The credit cards have been frozen. You have until tomorrow morning to leave the penthouse. Security will be there to collect the keys. David, you can't do this. This is insane. Goodbye, Julian." The line went dead. Julian stood in the middle of the living room, the silence of the penthouse suddenly feeling very loud. At 11:30 a.m., Isabella called. She was screaming. "Julian, my card was declined, in front of everyone. I tried to buy the vintage scarf, and the machine said, 'Contact issuer.' I tried the black card, the gold card, everything. Fix this immediately." "Isabella, come home," Julian whispered. "What? Come home. We have to pack." The fall was swift and brutal. By evening, the Aston Martin was gone, towed away by a flatbed truck, while Julian watched helplessly from the balcony. The movers, paid for by the company, arrived the next morning. They didn't pack everything. They only packed what Julian and Isabella could prove they had purchased with their own personal funds. It turns out that wasn't much. The furniture belonged to the company. The art belonged to the company. Even the high-end electronics were corporate assets. They left with 4 suitcases of clothes and a box of personal trinkets. They checked into the Four Seasons, assuming this was a temporary misunderstanding. Julian spent 3 days trying to call me. I did not answer. He tried to enter the headquarters of Vance Global. His security badge had been deactivated. The guards, men who had known him since he was a boy, refused to make eye contact as they turned him away. By the 4th day, the reality of the situation began to set in. The credit card on file at the Four Seasons was declined. They were asked to leave. They moved to a cheaper hotel, then a motel near the airport. Isabella's rage turned into cold detachment. "You said you were a tycoon," she hissed at him one night, sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress. "You said you built that company." "I thought I did," Julian shouted, running his hands through his unwashed hair. "I thought I was running things." "You were playing dress-up," she spat, "and I am not going to live in a motel with a child." She left the next morning. She didn't say goodbye. She just left a note saying she was going back to her parents in Miami and that he shouldn't follow her until he had his millions back. Julian was alone. He had $200 in cash, no car, no home, no wife, and for the first time in his life, no safety net. He spent the first week in a daze of self-pity and anger. He drank cheap whiskey and raged against me in his head. He told himself I was a monster, a vindictive witch who wanted to humiliate him. He composed angry text messages that he never sent. But hunger has a way of clarifying the mind. When the money ran out, Julian had to check out of the motel. He slept in a homeless shelter for 3 nights. The shock of it, the smell of unwashed bodies, the despair in the eyes of the men around him shattered the last remnants of his pride. He needed a job. He applied to investment firms. They asked for references. He couldn't give them. He applied to tech startups. They asked for his portfolio of successful exits. He had none. He realized, with a terrifying clarity, that he had no marketable skills. He knew how to order expensive wine. He knew how to critique a marketing deck. But he didn't know how to do anything. Desperation drove him to the industrial sector. He didn't use the name Vance. He used his middle name, Robert. He walked into a temp agency that specialized in day labor. "Can you lift 50 pounds?" the agent asked, looking at Julian's soft hands and tired eyes. "Yes," Julian said. "Can you work nights?" "Yes." "Do you have steel-toed boots?" "No," the agent sighed. "Go to the surplus store down the street. Get boots, come back. I have a shift at a distribution center in South Chicago. It pays $15 an hour." Julian bought the cheapest boots he could find. He went to the job. It wasn't Vance Global. It was a competitor, a massive logistics hub that moved freight 24 hours a day. Julian was assigned to the loading dock. His job was to unload trucks, box after box, 50 pounds, 60 pounds. The wind whipped through the open bay doors, freezing his sweat against his skin. His back screamed in agony. His fingers blistered and bled. "Hey, Hollywood! Move it!" the foreman shouted at him. "We got a schedule to keep." Julian gritted his teeth and lifted another box. That night, he slept in a rented room in a basement apartment shared with 3 other men. It cost him half his weekly pay. He ate instant noodles and fell asleep before he could even take off his boots. This became his life. Wake up, ache, work, bleed, sleep, repeat. February turned into March. The bitter cold of Chicago began to thaw, and something inside Julian began to change as well. He stopped thinking about the penthouse. He started thinking about the boxes. He noticed inefficiencies. He saw how the forklifts crossed paths, creating bottlenecks. He saw how the inventory system lagged, causing drivers to wait unnecessarily. One lunch break, he was sitting on a pallet, eating a sandwich. The foreman, a gruesome man named Miller, was yelling at a driver. "The manifest is wrong. We can't load this until the system updates." Julian stood up. He walked over. "Mr. Miller," he said quietly. "What do you want, Robert? The system isn't wrong. The SKU codes for this client changed last week. If you input the legacy code with a prefix of 0, it overrides the lock." Miller looked at him suspiciously. "How do you know that?" I used to work with similar software," Julian lied. Miller grunted. "Try it." Julian typed the code into the ruggedized tablet. The screen turned green. Access granted. Miller looked at Julian with a new expression. Not respect, exactly, but curiosity. "All right, Hollywood, back to work," but things changed. Miller started giving him different tasks: inventory management, route optimization. Julian applied the mind that had once analyzed stock markets to the flow of physical goods. He found he was good at it, not because of his name, but because he was paying attention. He made friends, real friends. Not people who wanted to ride in his Aston Martin, but men like Tyrell, who worked 2 jobs to put his daughter through college, and heavy-set Stan, who shared his wife's homemade lasagna with Julian because you look like a skeleton, kid. Julian learned that Tyrell's back pain came from a cheap mattress he couldn't afford to replace. He learned that Stan worried about his pension. He learned that the dead weight he used to despise were the people carrying the world on their shoulders. One evening in May, 6 months after the dinner, Julian was walking home from his shift. He passed a bakery. In the window, there was a tiramisu cake. He stopped. He stared at it. He remembered the dinner. He remembered the cruelty in his voice. Pay rent. He felt a wave of shame so potent it almost brought him to his knees. He took out his phone. He hadn't called me in months. He dialed my number. It rang 4 times. "Hello?" My voice was wary. "Mom," Julian said. His voice was raspy from the warehouse dust. "Julian, are you okay? Do you need money?" "No," he said quickly. "No money. I wanted to say." He choked on the words. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not for the apartment, but for the disrespect. I didn't know. I didn't know what it took to build what you built." "Where are you, Julian?" "I'm working, Mom. I'm okay. I just needed to tell you that." He hung up before I could answer. July came with the humid heat of the Midwest. I was in my office at Vance Global, reviewing the quarterly reports. The numbers were good, but my heart was heavy. I had tracked Julian, of course. A mother always knows. I knew where he worked. I knew where he lived. It took every ounce of my willpower not to send a car to pick him up, not to rescue him from the grime and the struggle. But I knew that if I rescued him, I would break him. He had to finish the forge. Then, the crisis hit. A massive cyber attack paralyzed the logistics network of the Midwest. Systems went down everywhere. Vance Global was hit hard, but our competitors were hit harder. The news reported chaos. Supply chains broken. Hospitals running out of supplies. I was in the command center, trying to coordinate a manual override for our fleet, when my assistant ran in. "Mrs. Vance, there is a man in the lobby. He says he has a solution for the routing protocol. He refuses to leave." "Who is it?" "He says his name is Robert." "But, Mrs. Vance, it looks like your son." I went down to the lobby. Julian stood there. He looked different. He was thinner, but wired with muscle. His hands were rough, stained with grease. He wore work boots and a flannel shirt. He didn't look like a prince anymore. He looked like a worker. He held a sheaf of papers covered in handwritten diagrams. "Julian?" "Mom," he said, breathless. "I know how the routing override works. The software at my distribution center, it's a legacy version of what Vance uses. I found a backdoor loop yesterday when the system started glitching. If you patch your mainframe through the analog dispatch frequency, you can bypass the frozen servers." I looked at him. This wasn't abstract theory. This was mechanics. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I mapped it out. Look." He showed me the diagrams. It was brilliant. It was messy, desperate, and brilliant. "Come with me," I said. We went to the server room. The IT technicians were skeptical, but Julian spoke their language now. He didn't speak in buzzwords. He spoke in protocols and patches. They implemented his fix. For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, a green light flickered on the main board. Then another. Then, the map of Chicago lit up. Trucks started moving. The system breathed again. A cheer went up in the room. Julian leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a dirty hand. I walked over to him. "You saved the fleet," I said. "I just connected the dots," he shrugged. He looked at me, really looked at me. "You look tired, Mom." "I am tired, Julian." He hesitated. "I should go. My shift starts in an hour. Miller will kill me if I'm late." "Julian," I said, "stay." "I can't. I have a job. A real one. I'm offering you a job, Julian." He stiffened. "I don't want charity, Mom. I'm done with that." "It's not charity," I said firmly. "I need a director of operations who understands the systems from the ground up. I need someone who knows what it's like to lift the box, not just count the profits." I looked at his hands, the calluses, the scars. "Your father had hands like that," I whispered. Julian looked at his own hands. "I'm not him, Mom. And I'm not the guy who sat at your table in December." "I know," I smiled, tears finally pricking my eyes. "That guy is gone. I like this one better." Julian didn't accept immediately. He finished his week at the warehouse. He said goodbye to Tyrell and Stan. He promised to help Tyrell's daughter with her resume. He returned to Vance Global, not as the heir, but as an employee. He refused the penthouse. He rented a small one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, one he paid for with his own salary. 2 years passed. It was Christmas Eve again. The penthouse on Lakeshore Drive was full of people, but the crowd was different. Tyrell was there with his wife. David Klein was chatting with Miller, whom Julian had hired to run the new distribution hub. The atmosphere was warm, loud, and genuine. I sat at the head of the table this time. Julian stood to make a toast. He held a glass of wine, but his other hand rested on my shoulder. "To Elena Vance," he said, his voice strong and clear, "the woman who built this house, the woman who built this company, and the woman who loved me enough to kick me out of it." Laughter rippled through the room. "I thought losing everything was the end of my life," Julian continued, looking down at me with absolute devotion. "But it was just the beginning. I learned that you don't own what you buy. You only own what you earn, and the only rent that matters is the respect you pay to the people around you." He kissed my cheek. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Rent is paid in full." I looked at my son. He wasn't the master of the universe. He was something far better. He was a good man. I reached up and patted his rough, capable hand. "Merry Christmas, Julian. Welcome home." The snow fell softly outside, covering the scars of the city, but inside, the fire was warm, and for the first time in a long time, the foundation was solid. The lesson had been learned, not in the comfort of silence, but in the noise of the struggle. And that, I knew, was the only legacy worth leaving.